Thanks. I work with produce farms across the state, getting into compliance with food safety regulations, specifically buyer required third-party audits, as well as compliance with the FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act. Um, and because of that work with produce safety, I tend to get a lot of other questions about food safety. And when it gets into processing, that's a totally different type of activity than, say, growing fresh produce that you're selling as a whole crop to consumers. But I was getting a lot of questions about cottage food, and this was really interesting to me because I saw this as an opportunity for our farms in the state, particularly those that are already selling direct to consumer. So if you have a farm stand or you sell at a farmer's market, maybe you have a CSA. Um, we have lots of ways that we reach our consumers here in the state with our products. And so I've spent over the past, what has it been? It's been a couple of years now that we've had the cottage food permitting in the state. And I've been going back and forth with the Department of Health as unique questions come up from growers about, how can they implement cottage food at their farm? So when it gets to the real processing stuff, I haven't had a lot of experience with that. It's been more of the farm-based questions that I've been receiving. So tonight we're going to talk about the products that you can produce in your own kitchen that would fit with this cottage food permit. We'll talk about the processes that you're allowed to do. We'll also cover things that you're not permitted to do under this permit. There's a list of ingredients that you're not allowed to use. We'll talk about the application process, the requirements that you have to implement in your own kitchen when creating things with the cottage food permit. And then we'll talk too about sales locations for cottage food products. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty information that's really important for to be in compliance with the cottage food permit. So there was a lot of buzz when New Jersey implemented the cottage food permit process. We were one of the last states to allow this. Um, and this was really something that came about because of the Home Bakers Association, right? This was really a bakers. There was a lots of people that are really good at baking in the state and wanted to be able to sell their products, but were unable to because we didn't have a cottage food law. And so with that, right, came opportunities for farms and for more than just baking to be able to use this permit for. So this went into effect in October of 2021. It's specific to human food only. We get some questions, people that are interested in doing pet food, but this doesn't cover pet foods or dog treats or anything like that. It has to be human foods. I checked today, and there were over 1,800 permits that have been issued by the Department of Health as a cottage food permit. So that's a good number. I feel like in the fall, late fall, there were 1,400. So people keep applying for these permits, and they keep approving a good number of them. And when I searched in the database for how many farms were possibly in there, I came up with 35 where farm was in the name of the business. So it was nice to see we've got a good number of farms that are taking the opportunity to use this permit to enhance what they can offer their customers. And so in the basic steps of can you use cottage food permitting on your farm, right? You have to be able to meet your local zoning laws, or you might have zoning laws that do not allow you to do cottage food. So that's some homework that you have to do on your end, right? We'll go over that list of approved products. You also have a threshold for sales with the cottage food permit. You can't sell more than $50,000 worth of cottage food items and still be able to use the permit. If you go beyond that, then it triggers, it could be wholesale or retail food requirements. You are required to produce these cottage food products in your home kitchen. So if you're thinking to create a kitchen on your farm that's outside of your home kitchen, that would be a red flag for the Department of Health. So it does have to be something you're doing in your own home kitchen. And then you have to be able to meet other requirements of the permit application. But you can see here, there's a variety of products that I have on this page, right? It's more than just baked items. You can use things that you're growing at the farm as part of your cottage food products. So, really happy to be able to say that the Department of Health has built a really robust website specific to cottage food, and maybe some of you have already taken a look at that. You could see this is the landing page for cottage food with Department of Health. They have drop-down boxes with lots of information. They've really thought out the kinds of the more common questions that they get from people, um, and have additional information on there. And then at the end, I'll show you, I'll give you the email address for them. But there's also a question portal, so you could submit questions to them if they don't cover a specific thing that you're thinking to produce. And so that beforehand information gathering is really important. Um, and it could save you time and effort, right? If it's something that they're not going to approve, you don't want to go through that whole process. Because it is, when we get through it, it's a bunch, right? So the state has a listing of currently permitted foods with cottage for the cottage food permit. And I say currently because this is something that is subject to change. Honey was originally on the do not, or was something that you couldn't sell. And that sort of lumped in all honey producers, which was a problem, and that was stripped away from this. But you can see, right, we have a big variety of items that are permitted with cottage food, right? We start with those baked items, candies, chocolate covered nuts, dried fruits that are covered in chocolate also, dried herbs and seasonings, including mixtures. You could do dried pasta, dried baking mixes, fruit jams, jellies and preserves, fudge, granola, right? Nut mixtures, nut butters, popcorn, caramel corn. You can roast coffee if you want to, or do dried teas. And so there's a nice variety of things, which is great. Um, but you could only produce things that are not that don't require refrigeration. And so there's a ban on anything that requires refrigeration. So if you have a really great cheesecake recipe, you're not going to be able to produce that under the cottage food permit. So that TCS is non-temperature controlled substances. And so when we think about what's the issue with temperature controlled substances, right, we're thinking about the moisture content or moisture activity of these products as well as the pH. And so, right, time and temperature are important in terms of the ability of decay organisms or human pathogens to grow if they're within this food product. And so the Department of Health is really reducing the risk for human pathogen growth and the quality of the product by just saying you can only sell things that can sit out at room temperature with the cottage food permit. Um, and so when we think about what is that appropriate pH level, we want it to be below 4.6. And then we also want a water activity that's lower than 0.85. And so typically food products that need to be refrigerated have a pH that's higher than that and a water activity that's higher than that. And when we think about those temperature danger zones for those temperature control products, right, it's between 41 and 135 degrees F, right? So it's really about environment. We want to create an environment that's not going to allow bacterial growth, that's going to affect the quality of the product as well as the food safety aspect of the product. So there's a listing also of ingredients that are prohibited. And it's a pretty decent list. And so you can see we've got dairy products in here that are prohibited. Um, we've got fresh fruit, right? High water content for fresh fruit items. Obviously meat, fish. They've got vegetables that are fried or dried. Um, and then some other things, right? We see people that get really innovative with their products and maybe they want to do a rum cake or something where there's CBD infused in it, or maybe they're making health claims, right? All of these types of things are prohibitive. But you might notice that very last thing on that list, right? We've got those homegrown or foraged plants, herbs, vegetables, and fruits. And so this is going to be an important part of the application is to indicate where you're sourcing the raw ingredients that you're using for your cottage food product. And so our Department of Health has drawn the line at any homegrown ingredients. So if you know if you've got a farm and you're growing it as part of your farm, you're a commercial business, then that would be fine. The Department of Health is concerned about the contamination in the backyard of people, and so I've had some conversations with them about it, but it does seem to be something that they're not budging on. And so this is something that, if you didn't realize this and you submit your application and you indicate that you're growing maybe herbs that you're using for a certain product, your application would be denied because it was something that was being grown at home versus at a farm. And so just be careful with your wording with that, particularly if you're a farm. And that's important language to have in there. When it comes to the dairy products, right? We've got a moisture issue, but they're also concerned about potential contamination from salmonella and E. coli. One thing that stood out to me that I thought a lot of people might be interested in producing is there's no mention of salsa. So you can see peppers are on the prohibited list here. Um, and so if you were to want to submit a recipe for salsa that doesn't include peppers, I'd be interested to know how that would come back. That's just one of those questions that I still have. Um, and they also include on this list fresh fruit, but on the previous slide, right, we had a listing, jams and jellies, and so fresh fruit would be an ingredient for that. And so I think like if you're purchasing those items from a farm, it shouldn't be an issue, but that would be something I'd encourage you to email them or submit a question through the website to them just to verify that what you want to do is going to be allowed. So it saves you that time and energy. So the FDA has a master inventory of substances added to foods. And so the Department of Health is going to be verifying anything that they're maybe not familiar with that you're including in your recipe. They're going to verify that with this food inventory. And this is searchable online. I do have all the links I talk about tonight. At the end, I'll grab them and put them all in the chat for you. Um, some of them I do have QR codes for. And so this is interesting, right? Because you can look up it, online in advance, right? Is everything that you're going to include in your recipe in there? I'd assume it is. But again, the Department of Health did comment to me that people have been really innovative in the recipes that they're submitting, to the point that they're not comfortable to know if this is something that's appropriate or not. And we'll talk a little bit more about what to do in that situation as well. So the Department of Health also has a list of prohibited products. Again, right, this is current because it can change. So we go back to that. Anything that's going to require refrigeration is prohibited. Um, Cotton candy can be done in the home kitchen. You just can't take that cotton candy machine out to a location that's not the kitchen to spin that. Um, Candied apples are something that's not allowed. And then that is something that we've had, I think it was Listeria outbreak involved with candy apples. And they really found that issue was with the stick going in there. So when we have a pretty visible outbreak related to any of these items, that gets the attention of these health agencies. And so that's when we tend to see things added to these prohibited product lists. Um, right? You see those dried herbs grown in a garden, right? So dried herbs should be coming from a commercial vendor. Raw pizza dough's on this list. Pepper, rhubarb, tomato jelly sauce. Pies other than apple, peach, blueberry, and strawberry. I didn't do the deep dive on that, but it must be moisture content related. Flour syrups, wildflower seeds. Right here we are with that anything with health or immunity claims. So you can't put that on your label. If even if you think it's really healthy, even if you feel that it has some qualities about it that would warrant that kind of a claim, the health department's not going to approve any label that has those things on it. Fruit butters are on the prohibited list, and that's just because their sugar content tends to be a little bit lower, so we have a higher water activity. with fruit butters, and so that made the list. Any liquid beverages would be prohibitive. Fresh herb or flower teas, so those would need to be dried herb or dried flower teas rather than fresh. Oh, I got herbs and flowers grown at a rest. I put that in a lot because I feel like that's something that's going to catch a lot of people. Hot sauce, barbecue sauce, infused oil, tomato sauce, balsamic vinegars, all of those are prohibitive. And it's interesting, right? Everybody's got a hot sauce recipe that they want to be able to sell, but you would need to go to a certified kitchen for all of those things. And then again, with those pet foods and dog treats. Another really important thing to consider is the sales location of the products that you're thinking of making. So if you have a farm stand or a farm market that is not retail licensed, so the health department doesn't come in and do an inspection, they're right, you don't have a license for it, you can sell your cottage food products there at a non-retail licensed farm stand. But if you have a retail license, the health department wants to see your cottage foods products sold outside of that retail licensed location at your farm, to the effect that they've had someone had was selling it in their retail licensed location. They had to move everything onto the front porch of the house. So to designate, right? They want it really clear to people that it's not being produced in a certified kitchen. Um, you're allowed to sell at farmers markets, right? Being in compliance with the regulations of the farmers market. Any type of, on-farm distribution. So if you have a CSA and you want to include products with that, right? Other ways that you've figured out how to sell to the public, you can do that. Just have to indicate that on the application. You're not allowed to mail these products to anyone. You're not allowed to sell them, go across state lines with them. And you're not allowed to sell them to other retail stores or wholesale food establishments. So you can see I marked here who you would need to talk to if you were interested in that avenue of sales. So in some cases, it's your local health department that you would need to go through, or with that retail sales or wholesale food, you would need to go through the Department of Health for the state with their wholesale food project. And so there's more information about all of that on their website. So you submit your application directly to the Department of Health via email. You're able to download the application from their website. And you'd want to do that on your computer. It doesn't work so well with a phone. And so it's a fillable form where you'd be able to put all of the information that's required onto that and then save it onto your computer. So then you could email it to them. Um, you have to include, right, like I've been saying, all the details about the products that you're interested in selling. And you have to declare major food allergens. And that's really a checkbox next to each of the recipes that you have. And then you have to do a series of attestations. So, right, saying, yes, I'm going to follow the specific facility requirements that are included with part of this permitting. Yeah, you follow through with those sanitation requirements, and we'll go through all of this. And so really, you're giving them your word that you're going to follow all these best practices, as well as the requirements of the rule, right? That financial threshold for that what's on there. And it seems, from what I understand, is that the health department is following up. They're looking at what people are doing, whether that's looking online or at markets and things. And so they are paying attention once they issue the permits. So the cost of the permit is $100, and it's good for 2 years. You can see this is the first page of the permit. It's really just specific information about you and where your location is. An important thing to note is when you're filling out this application, getting ready to send it in, really think through everything that you would like to produce under cottage food. Each time you make a change to a recipe or the things that you are producing, you have to resubmit the application and pay the fee again. So there's no way to sort of update the permit application that you've already submitted. And so maybe that makes most sense, right? Every 2 years is when you revisit what you're doing and if you're going to change anything. Um, but don't feel rushed to get something in to get that permit, thinking that you'll be covered for any changes that you want to make. Really have a good idea of what it is you're going to be doing before you submit that application. Page two of the application is really basically the nitty-gritty of what you have to comply with in order to get the permit, right? So you have to agree that you're producing this in your own home kitchen. You have to agree that you are going to wash your hands at appropriate times, use appropriate sanitation practices, and that are maintaining a kitchen that doesn't have rodents and insects in it. Um, Talks about preparation and packing, minimum standards, the things that you're not allowed to do in your kitchen when you're producing your cottage food products, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as adhering to those local rules, which is really your municipal zoning, um, as well as some other things, supplemental things that you need to include with your application, which we'll talk more about next. And then this is once you download the application, this is what you'll see. And this is where you would add in all of the information about the project, the products that you are going to be producing. So you include the product type, the product name, and any of those major food allergens. Um, and then you can have supplemental information that's going to follow up with really the all of the ingredients, the sources of where you're getting those things. So it's going to be a decent amount of attachments to that email that you send to the Department of Health. So what the Department of Health really wants to know about each of your products, right? Obviously, the name of the product, or if it's a filling or frosting. Is it a trade secret? Is this something that's unique to you that you don't want the public to know about? Um, right? That impacts what they're able to share with people. I'm not sure who's looking at these things, but that Open Public Records Act, if somebody wanted to see it, that would protect you. You need to list all of the ingredients that are in the recipe, including the quantity of each. So they're looking for that weight, right? We're thinking about particularly the label, right? How you're going to list everything on there by weight, just like all the other product labels that we have at home. Um, they also want to know the step-by-step recipe instructions. So they want to be able to read the instructions to understand your process for making this product. And so they're really looking for risk within that process, right? If it's something you have to bake, are you going to be hitting an appropriate temperature to reduce that moisture content and potentially kill off any, bacteria that might be there? They're really going to pay a lot of attention to those instructions, and to get this process moving as quickly as possible, right? Give as much details as you possibly can, right? Leave them with little questions about what it is that you're actually doing. Right, as we said earlier, they want to know where the ingredients are coming from. So all those raw ingredients, what's your source? If it's Wegmans or ShopRite or Whole Foods, right, you would say that. If it's coming from the farm, right, your farm, put down the name of your farm. If it's coming from somebody else's farm, you could do that. Right, they're really looking to make sure that this is a commercial operation to make them feel better about the overall quality of the raw ingredients that you're using. And then you'll also have to submit a copy of the product label, and I have an example of that later. So it doesn't have to be I don't think it has to be the really fancy version of the label, but right, like a draft of the label that's going to give all of the information that's required on the product that you're going to sell. So you're also required just to supply some supporting documentation, the first being a water test report. So if you have municipal water coming into your kitchen, you can just submit a copy of the water bill with your permit application as proof that your water is coming from a municipal source. If you have a well, you'll need to have a full drinking water test by a certified drinking water lab to submit with that. So if that's something that you've done recently, you could submit that. I don't believe they give a window of time within the application of what time frame they would consider valid. So if you've got one that's a couple years old, you might want to reach out to them and ask about that. That'd be a good question for me to write down so I can remember to ask them that too. Um, what's important, right, with the drinking water test. So this is This could be a couple $100 for that full drinking water test. The picture that I have here is the DEP website, and you can use the QR code there to access it. DEP has a listing of certified drinking water labs on there. And so you could see we've got lots of water testing labs in the state. Just want to make sure that they're certified, and that they understand the purpose of what it is. Really, if you say it's a potability test or drinking water test for food production, they should be able to know exactly it's what you need to get a CO in a house anyway. Um, and then the Department of Health doesn't allow any other water sources, right? So it has to be city water, municipal water, or well water. If you get a well water test result back, that comes back with issues. So it wouldn't be clean enough to be able to use. You'd want to inspect your well. Are there any obvious signs of issues? Um, you could repair any issues that if you find some, and then you can shock your well. Rutgers has a fact sheet on how to shock your well with bleach, and then you would need to do another test of your well to make sure that what you did actually worked and solve the issue that's there. Um, but really, you probably want to, get an expert to come in and take a look at the well and verify that that it's not compromised. Could be talking about a crack on the well casing or other issues. Because I know we find, right, lots of people haven't tested their well since they bought the house, right? And that could be a long time. If you haven't had issues, then a lot of people, why would you do that? Whereas a lot of farms, right, we're pushing food safety, and so there's more water testing there. But there's lots of good information on the DEP site. Another supporting document that's a requirement is a certificate of attendance, a completion of the Food Protection Manager training certificate program. And so you can see we've got a bunch of different companies listed here. These are all available on the Department of Health's website also. And so you have to have the Food Protection Manager training. And so that's longer and more intensive than a normal, serve safe food handler training. And so that really does a deep dive into, sanitary practices and all the things that you would need to know with, making food for sale. Something else that has come up is if you have a recipe that has an item in it that's not listed as approved, or you're going outside of the box, doing something a little bit different, then you may be required, or you would likely be required to do shelf life testing. And so this is where you would pay for an outside company to do an analysis on your product. And really what they're looking for is that water activity and pH. So making sure that it's below those levels that we talked about earlier. But again, right, it's something that you have to do before you submit your application. And so again, something that I would want to reach out to them about beforehand is to verify that they're going to want you to do that shelf life testing, especially right since you're paying for it, and it's going to take more time in order to get things through and get your permit approved for you. There are a bunch of labs in New Jersey that'll do this, and others. If you complete, if you make your product and hand off the finished product, the testing shouldn't be that expensive. When I was talking to Jessica at the Department of Health, I think it was under $50 for both of those tests to be done. You could also submit your recipe to the lab and where they would make the whole product, and then that would get into a couple $100 or more in order for them to be able to do that. So if that's a route you're going to head down, you'll want to talk to the lab in advance and really make sure that they're going to be able to provide to you what you need in order to get your permit and prove that it is something that doesn't need refrigeration. That's really the bottom line, is that Department of Health wants the assurance that what it is that you're making doesn't have that water activity or pH that's going to require refrigeration. So you could use this QR code to take you to, it's a Rutgers website for Don Schaffner, who's our department chair for food science at Rutgers, and he's got a list of a bunch of labs that he vouches for. which is, I love a list. It's always nice to have a list. So I mentioned earlier that you're going to have to submit an example of your product labeling. And so it's a product label for every product that you have on that list. So if you've got, if you have the idea you're going to make 10 things, you have to provide a label for each one of those things. So this label, I just Googled cottage food labels on Etsy, and there's a lot of vendors on Etsy that'll print up labels for you. But what I found here is that none of the labels allowed for a permit number, which is a requirement for New Jersey for your permit number to be on that label, as well as the specific statement that this food is prepared pursuant to NJAC 8-24-11 in a home kitchen that has not been inspected by the Department of Health. Right? That's a lot of words that have to fit on there. Um, but this label, right, it does tick a lot of the boxes in terms of the product. So, right, the common name of the food, the ingredients in descending order by weight. You should have already figured that out, right, when you put the application in of everything that was in there. And then if it contains any of the major food allergens, so that's eggs, fish, milk, peanuts, sesame, shellfish, soy, tree nuts, or wheat, you have to list that on the label as well as your name and the business name, that permit number, your town or municipality, and our state, as well as that statement. And then if you're selling away from the farms, if you're selling at farmers markets, you have to have a sign at your booth or table with your permit number and that statement as well. So they're very intent on making sure that the people that are purchasing these products know that this was created in a home kitchen. And this is what the permit looks like. So on their website, they say if it's a pretty simple application, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks. If it's ingredients that need to be verified or it's something they really have to take a closer look at, it's 8 to 12 weeks. But a farm that I work with that went through this process, it was pretty early on in terms of them allowing this. It took 4 months for them to get their permit, and it was pretty basic stuff that was on their permit. I think they were inundated in the beginning. But right, like as we saw, right, there's still more and more applications that keep coming in. I think this is keeping them busy over at the Department of Health. So I wanted to go into also some of the production requirements. So what's going to happen in your kitchen um, when you're producing things? What are the things that you have to follow through with? And so, right, I'm kind of just scratching the surface with these because you're going to go through that food safety manager um, class, which is really going to do a deep dive into everything. But as you would expect, right? You expect hand washing to be, right up front in terms of reducing risk in the kitchen. And so those hand washing facilities have to be easily accessible in that space where you're producing your cottage food products. They want warm running water, soap, and it needs to be paper towels to dry your hands, not a reusable towel. Um, right, sleeping quarters are separate from the food production and storage areas, right? So no one's going to come in and inspect. Well, no, I shouldn't say no one. In most municipalities, they won't come in and inspect unless there's like a major issue. Um, but yeah, kitchens should be kitchens for cottage food products and not sleeping areas. Anything that's being used in the process of making your products needs to be clean and in good repair. And your food contact surfaces are cleaned and sanitized prior to use, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Right, and there we are again, right, free of rodents and insects. Um, they have expectations, right, about when people are going to wash their hands or you're going to wash your hands, depending on who's involved in the process, right? So the expectation is hands are going to be washed prior to, when you start this process of creating cottage food products. Right? If you take a break to eat, use the restroom, smoke, touch animals, right? Anytime your hands may become contaminated, they should be washed, right? So we're washing our hands a lot, right? More so than we probably normally do as part of this process. Um, There's also the stipulation that food workers are not going to touch food with their bare hands, that ready to eat food. So single-use gloves, tongs, or other means are used. So, as things are coming out of the oven or, things are being packaged, we want to make sure that bare hands are not touching that final product. Um, some operators may choose to use single-use gloves. The one concern that I have with single-use gloves is that people sometimes forget that it's about reducing risk with the food product and think it's more for protecting their hands, right? So we want to change those gloves as frequently as we would be washing our hands in the kitchen. And so if you find it's a barrier, right, using gloves as a barrier to actually washing your hands, right, then those gloves are becoming contaminated. And so maybe reconsider that. And people should be comfortable, right, with changing gloves on a regular basis or more frequently than they probably would feel comfortable with. Um, Domestic activities are not to take place in the kitchen during cottage food preparation. So that space is really dedicated to producing these cottage foods, and nothing else should be going on in there, right? So a kid shouldn't be coming in to make lunch, or a husband coming in and using the space for other things. Right? Everybody that would be coming through that space needs to understand these activities are taking place. This is, you have a permit for this activity, and they should respect, right, that's a dedicated activity that's happening during that particular time. Infants, children, and pets should be excluded from the kitchen during cottage food preparation, right? That's probably one of the more harder things to do, especially right with our open plan houses. Nobody has a door to close off their kitchen anymore. So just think about, who's moving around in the house, and how we keep, especially cats, right? Cats and dogs, keep them out of that space during cottage food preparation. Right, we're back to that potable drinking water is used for hand washing, ware washing, and then certainly, right, as we're making the products that are for cottage food. I love this picture. The guy with the drink in his hand overseeing what she's making in the kitchen. Um, Smoking is prohibited during cottage food preparation, and ill workers are excluded from cottage food prep, which that can be really hard too, right? If we have deadlines or we have a market to get to and we have to create certain things to get to that market, it's easy to sort of like poo-poo that we're not feeling well. And so when we think about illnesses, that could be foodborne illnesses if you contaminate the products that you're making. We're really worried about those gastrointestinal illnesses, right? So, if we have cramping or diarrhea, jaundice, right, then those are all, signs that something's wrong. We could be contagious. And so we shouldn't be making cottage food products when we're not feeling well. And if it's your business and it's one person, then that becomes really hard when you have those deadlines. So when we think about countertops in particular and other surfaces where you can use a sanitizer on them, we want to make sure that we're using a four-step cleaning and sanitizing process in the kitchen. And so, right, this is more of an industrial, these pictures are more industrial. We use these with farm food safety and packing houses, but the idea is the same, right? So for our countertops, we want to first get rid of any of the raw materials, organic matter, any debris that's on these surfaces to try to make that surface look as clean as possible with just water. And maybe we're using a scrub brush, depending on what it was that we were making. And we want to follow that by coming through with the detergent. And right, we've got a scrub brush there as well, because we want to prevent biofilms from forming on the countertops, right? And so when we've got food material that is on these surfaces, we've got moisture on the surfaces, we can get this fine layer of bacterial growth that we can't see with our naked eye to start. If it's let go for a long time, when we think of shower drains, that's a biofilm that's really gross and yucky and visible, right? But that all starts with a very fine layer that we can't see, right? So we want to prevent biofilms from forming on these countertops. And so we've done a lot of sampling on other food contact surfaces on farms, and it's really easy for these biofilms to form if we're not coming through with scrub brushes and we're not using this four-step process. So once we've used the detergent on the surface, we want to get that detergent off as best we can with water. I know this can be right? This can be hard to really do in the kitchen because we're not just going to put it all on the floor. Um, but once we try to get as much of that detergent off there as possible, then we follow through with a sanitizer that's labeled for food contact surfaces. So a lot of the product that we have in our kitchen are going to have that on the label. It's important to take a look at that label. Make sure that it is labeled for food contact surfaces. It is for use in, food production environments. And then make sure that you're using it in the appropriate way. A lot of the sanitizers will have a period of time that the surface has to stay wet with the sanitizer in order for it to be effective. And so the label is going to give you that information. And if you've got, if it's got the windows open, it might be a breezy day, right? If you've got wind going around, it could be harder to keep that surface wet for as long as the label tells you to. So really pay attention to your ability to keep the surface wet for that long with the sanitizer. Run into a big problem with the sanitizing wipes that come in the plastic jugs. There's just not enough moisture on those for them to usually stay, allow that surface to stay wet for as long as it needs. So usually you have to do a reapplication with the sanitizing wipes. But if you're using those, right, we want to make sure that we're following those label instructions and that that surface is free of any debris, right? We're doing that cleaning process beforehand. So it's easy for me to talk about sanitation because I do that a lot. Um, just to recap a little bit about the steps to obtaining a permit, right? First, you got to determine what it is you want to make. Then check all those lists that the Department of Health has on their website, right? Are you using any products that are prohibitive? Are you, doing any products that they outright say that you can't do in a home kitchen that you would, maybe you'd have to do wholesale. Maybe you would have to go to a certified kitchen. You want to think too about your sales locations. Do those all fall within the confines of the cottage food permit? Get that your water source tested for potability. Obtain your food safety manager certification. And again, I think that's about $150 for that certificate. And most of them you can do them online, so it's not too bad. You'll need to think about your production process, right? As we get into like, what are you going to put down on that application? All of that supporting documentation that they're asking for about your products. And then think about that sample label. That's the fun part, right? Thinking about what that label's going to look like. Follow up with Department of Health maybe before you turn everything in to verify if you need to conduct shelf life testing, or if you have other questions about what you're doing. There's a lot of information, as I said, on their website, but still, right, I was able to come up with some additional questions. And then, right, in the home stretch, you're going to submit that application and supporting documents to the Department of Health. And then you wait and see. So they would email you this email address that I have here that you can email with questions. That's the email address that they would email you from with if they have questions for you about your application. If you wanted to use the portal online to ask them questions, it's nj.gov/health/cottage food. And if you haven't taken a look at their website yet, I encourage you to. There's a lot of really great information on there. If you're nosy and you want to see who already has a cottage food permit in your area, and they're in every county in the state, you could go to the homepage for cottage food, and at the very top, you can download the Excel sheet of active permits, and this QR code here will take you to that web page. And that list is probably changing at least weekly. As people continue to start small businesses in their home kitchen. If you decide that you want to produce items that don't fall under cottage food, so they're prohibited under cottage food, right? So we're going into products where you would need to use a certified kitchen for production, right? The certified kitchens are inspected. It's usually the local health department that is managing that. I know farms have in the past gone to Granges that have certified kitchens or local churches that have them. Darcy's going to talk about the NOFA project, which is the follow-up to this, which will be a certified kitchen. But going in that route too, you should be aware, right? The state food code is called Chapter 24. And that is one of these days that's going to get updated, which is going to reflect the federal food code, which most states are in alliance with already. Um, but also on the Department of Health website, they've got information about, who do you need to talk to if you want to do certain things. So if you have, a dream of a food truck, they say talk to your local health department. Right, Cottage Food is on there as well as all the others. So I do applaud the Department of Health for the amount of information that they have online. And they do seem to be answering people's questions. So that wraps it up for my slides.
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith. That was very,
Yep.
very educational. And we do have a few questions if I
Oh,
can
good.
read through some of the questions for you.
Sure.
First one we have is any idea why pumpkins and sweet potatoes are prohibited?
My assumption is that has to do with water content when you cook them, that you can't get it below, what was it, 0.85 for water activity. Um, that's my assumption.
Okay. Next question is on the permitted list is dried herbs and seasonings. Why is their definition? What is their definition of seasonings? Pepper are prohibited, so that must not be their permitting seasoning. So what is permitted under seasoning?
Yeah, I don't have that answer of what they mean by that. There are a couple things that sound that, right? They say no fresh fruits, but then there's some items that you're allowed to produce that you would obviously have to have fresh fruits in order to produce. Um, so if you're thinking in that direction of seasonings and have questions, I would reach out to them directly. It might just be
Yes.
they haven't had that question yet, right? And that's what it takes to get answers to some of
Yeah,
these things.
to have the more explanation there. All right, next question is the $50,000 limit for the cottage food item, or is the 50,000 limit for sales of the entire business?
The entire business.
Okay,
Yes. If
and
you have
it said
10 items,
example.
it's all of those sales combined to get that
Okay,
50,000.
okay. Next one is, it's a long one. Can you speak to all the costs involved in getting the cottage food permit and then selling your goods? You mentioned a permit application renewal fee as well as the water testing. Are there other fees to sell at, say, farmers markets, table fee, local municipalities? With every fee, is it making a small home business space cost prohibitive?
Yeah, those are all really good things to think about. Um, right. So I think if you say you had to get the shelf life testing and then you're paying for the training and you're paying for your water test, plus your application fee, you could be I think we're over 500, probably closer to $750 or so with just those fees. And then, yeah, farmers markets, it's going to really depend in terms of, yeah, renting space. But many farmers markets also require you to have $1 million of insurance in order to sell at those locations. So that would be another fee. I don't know how much that even costs nowadays. But yeah, it could become cost prohibitive to do that.
Absolutely. And then two more. Last one, or the one I have here is if you are air drying herbs in the drying room, how does it fit into cottage food permit?
Yeah, this is one of the things I had to look up because um, y- in my conversation with the Department of Health, um, right, they said so dehydration and freeze drying are not permitted activities for cottage food. So if you're a farm growing herbs and you want to dry those herbs yourself and sell them, right, in one way or another, um, it seemed to me that that would not be allowed, that they want people, based on the language on the website, they want people to buy in products that are already dried in order to do those herbs, seasonings, whatever it is that we're talking about. But that was one of those things that I would like some more clarification. I see Janine's
Yeah.
comment.
We agree. Regulations. All right. And then I personally had a question. When you had shown the label that you had gotten off of Etsy, a question
Mhm.
that I had is, does everything have to fit on the one label or can you have two labels?
That's a
One
good question too.
with the claim that you are the cottage food and then one with the food or one picture of your business logo and then the rest on another?
Yeah. I I would suspect it could be more than one, just thinking about, retail and what you can do with that. But I wouldn't want to go that route without asking them that specifically, or at least, right, you're sending that in with your packaging I mean, with your packet of information. I would want to check that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And if for those of you that are farms that go on the website, you'll probably get to the point where you see where it talks about where, fresh products from farms, and they talk about you can only buy from certified farms. Right? There's no certification process for farms, right? You're either a commercial operation or you're not. And so if you're a commercial farm and somebody who wants to do cottage food wants to buy things from you, right, that's an opportunity for you. Because as long as you're a commercial farm, then you would be able to be a supplier of raw materials for cottage food.
All right, and then we have a last question here that came up. How do these rules and regulations compare to other US states, and do we think the laws will loosen or tighten over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think we'll see change over what's permitted and what's not permitted. Um, the list will probably get longer as to what's not permitted, just based on, the applications that are coming in. I think that's really informative to them, all of these applications that are coming in. I think they've been frustrated with how innovative people are with the recipes, that it's not just your standard, chocolate chip cookies and
Uh,
sourdough bread, right? Of course people are going to have innovation. Um, What's interesting is that I've seen other states that have a lower threshold for, like, so you could only sell up to $15,000 worth of cottage food products. I know there are other states that are pushing to go even higher than 50,000. I think we're just sort of the newest state in this. I know for sure they're paying attention to what's going on in other states. Um, but yeah, I hope time makes it easier. I'm at least really happy there's a lot of information online, right? There's like at least like some clarity of information there, whether we, agree with where they landed on certain things or not. Well, listen, we got honey off the list, so that was good.
that was.
That took a while. That was, yeah, great. And any time that I can interface with the Department of Health, I think it's great because, right, they're used to facilities, processing facilities, spaces, um, that are that are regulated, right? We could sanitize those spaces. And so getting them to understand more about, farm production is good. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I
All
think
right.
Janine brought up a good point. So the New Jersey Home Bakers Association, right, they are the ones that really got the cottage food. I mean, they've been going on for a long time about wanting
Mhm.
cottage food in New Jersey. But they also have a very active Facebook page. And I think you don't have to be a member to see the Facebook page. And there's just a lot of information about what's going on and what people want to see change, is on there as well. So.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Meredith. And thank
Yeah.
you again, everybody that came and took time for yourselves to learn about another avenue to do something fun.